those events. So maybe some of the social events that we've done, or some of the volunteer events.
Yeah, so we do quite a few events every year. This year I've kind of been heading up coordinating those to some extent. So in the past we've done things such as we went and saw Aladdin at the Denver Performing Arts Center as a group. That was super fun. We've also done escape rooms have been really popular. We went to a haunted house all together, which was it was a bonding experience for sure. So that was in the fall. Right now we have a few things up in the air for our spring social, but those are ranging from like going and like doing the like sip and paint things together, all the way to like axe throwing and paintball. So we're a very diverse group. I know axe throwing sounds a little aggressive, but it's really fun. And so we all like each other, I think we can all say. So it's so like being able to like coordinate, and of course we're all involved in different things. We're all involved in different majors, so we might not overlap too much in our day-to-day lives. But then having the opportunity to kind of get together and be like, what are you up to? And I think one thing I like about this group too, in addition to the social aspect, is just like we're all fairly humble in what we do, but we like to brag on each other. And so I think that's pretty cool too. And like you kind of need that in friends to like remind you like, hey, that part might have not done so well, but like you aced this class, or like you interviewed with this amazing company, or things like that. And so you kind of need that balance in your life too, and these guys provide that for me especially. So yeah, and I get to teach some of them, so that's also really fun to have them in class and like yell at people for putting hot glue on their hands, Armando.
One time.
So as, from what you guys remember, as we're going into the final stages of the Betcher process, what kind of just suggestions do you guys have about the interview and things like that?
Can I grab this one real quick? Reread your application. Pretty much everything that the panel is going to ask you about is going to be from your application. It's going to be things like, you took a bunch of political science classes in high school. Why are you going to an engineering school again? Personal experience on that one. And the other thing is, during the interview, remember to breathe.
Do not spin in the spinny chair. I was prepared for this, thankfully, but like you get in there and you're nervous and you're fidgeting and they sit you in this spinny chair and it's very, very, very tempting to sit there and kind of like roll around and do that. Resist the urge. That's my biggest thing. I actually have been in contact with Emma. She was one of my students for Summit this summer, and Josue. So I have like a pre-typed list of like my top interview advice. If you guys want to get my email afterwards, I will, or I guess give me your emails, that would probably work better. But I would be more than happy to send that out to you, but I'll let everybody else give their personal advice because I'm sure that they have a lot of big read stuff.
I've talked to somebody about this, but I would just say like you've made it to this point, so they know that you're qualified and they know that you're really good at everything that you do. So just show your personality in the interview and like just show that you're passionate about whatever it is that you do. Because they're gonna ask you questions based on your essays and based on what you put in your application. So just show that you love what you do and that like you have a reason for doing what you're doing. You're not just doing it to fill up like a resume or something like that, because they know that you've put in the work to get to where you're at right now. So just show that you're doing it for you and for your community and to give back to everyone that's helped you get there. But yeah, you don't have to like try to prove yourself or anything like that. Just be like honest about your experiences and just like let your personality and who you are come through.
I think it's important they might ask you a question that sends you a little bit surprised, I guess. There's an occasional question that you don't expect, even though it's from your application, you just don't expect them to ask about that. It's totally fine to compose yourself before you answer and collect yourself, and they probably even appreciate that as well if you give a thoughtful response as opposed to a just knee-jerk response. So take a moment to collect if you can.
Okay, so as Betcher finalists, you've already submitted your answers to all of their questions. You know, they know what you do. I think the purpose of the interview is to understand, or for you, it's an opportunity for you to show them that you can communicate. And that's not something that everybody can do. And I think it's a time to show them your humanity a little bit. One of my favorite pieces of advice, well actually I'll tell you two. The first one is when you're sitting there and you get really nervous, you know, tell yourself, oh, I'm just excited. So it's a little way for yourself to kind of channel that anxiety and stress into something potentially positive. Like, yeah, I'm just really excited about this interview, it's gonna be great. Another thing, which is my favorite really, is they won't necessarily exactly remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So if you show passion, and you make them feel like you love what you do, like everything that Sydney said, they'll realize that and they'll understand that, and that's what they're gonna remember about you.
I think for me, my biggest thing is, I feel like, especially Betcher finalists and like from all of you guys that I have met, you're like really amazing people and you're very humble, which is fantastic. But don't be afraid to humbly brag on yourself, if that makes sense. Like, they know that you guys are extremely successful, and if you've done something of significance, or like you've won an award, or you got published in a newspaper, or something like that, like don't be afraid to bring that up if they ask you questions like that are related. Because I think that's really important for you to show, like, yes, I'm passionate about this, but I'm also like successful in what I do. And so, but do it in a way that's not like, well, I did this, because that's not tacky, or that is tacky. Another thing that I would say from my personal experience is when you're done with your interview and you're kind of moving on, just don't start double thinking. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, I could have answered that better, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. Don't do that, because it's not like you can go back and fix it, and so it'll just cause you stress. And if you do get the letter in the mail, congratulations, that's awesome. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Or if you don't, or if you get the letter that's, sorry, you've been selected as a alternate. That was the hardest thing I think I dealt with in high school, which I didn't have that high school experience, obviously. But that was the hardest thing for me, is because as a Betcher finalist, as a Mines kid, I was very high achieving in high school. I got the grades, I could do the things, I was involved in a lot, and so being told to wait and being told maybe was not something that I was comfortable with. And so that was really hard for me, and it was one of the best days of my life when I got the phone call from Tiffany saying like, hey, like, you've got it, you've done it. But at the same time, like, I was fully prepared at that point to also not get it. So that's something that's really important. Like, even if you get the scholarship, that's fantastic, but just because you don't get it doesn't mean you're any less qualified. You're a finalist, so all finalists should get the scholarship. I wish there was that much money available. But that's just something to keep in mind, very real. And for parents, have a chat with your child, whoever is dropping off your kid. One thing that the Betcher Foundation told me was, like, have a talk with your parent. I didn't want my mom in the room with me. I didn't want her to lock me up, because I knew that having her around me would stress me out. So my mom went and waited in a coffee shop that was around the corner, and I met her after my interview. She dropped me off, she knew where I was and everything, but it was like kind of my first big step of doing something by myself. And so I know that's gonna be hard for some parents. It was really hard for my mom. She didn't want to not be there. But have that conversation with your kid. If they want you to come up, do it, that's fantastic, but like also make that their choice, I think, is the biggest piece of advice, because having my mom there, I think, would have made it a very different experience, but because she wasn't there, she could be more of a resource and like a stress reliever instead of a stress initiator. So, and I love my mom, we have a great relationship.
I'll add just one more thing onto that. Oh, I don't think this is on.
It might be a button at the bottom.
At the bottom? Okay.
You just gotta hold it.
Is it on? There we go. Okay. I was speaking to Emma and her mom about this a little bit earlier, but I think a big thing to think about, I know a lot of you are probably nervous, and the tendency when you're nervous and someone asks you a question is to just kind of quickly say facts. But I would recommend to you that think about each of the things that you're involved with and the things you've included in your application, and think about stories associated with each of those things that are really more human stories that you can talk about in your interview. So that way when they ask you a question and maybe you're a little bit caught off guard, you can think about those stories with that activity that you can kind of weave into an answer to that question. Because humans really relate to and remember stories, and that kind of brings out the passion that Armando was talking about. If you just kind of revert to facts or, just answering the question without really something that they can attach to as a human, it's not really something that they'll remember. So really thinking about stories as your interview's coming up in about a week, things that really kind of exemplify the leadership that you had or the service that you did in that specific instance. So.
For me, kind of like the consistent theme kind of throughout here is being authentic and being who you are. When I was trying to prepare for this interview, I was super nervous, not super used to speaking to people I don't know. I was doing a lot of mock interviews, trying to talk to teachers and other people, and a lot of the advice I was getting was centered around kind of being more showy, showing off who you were, and for me, that wasn't who I was. And when I was going into a new interview and I tried to apply this, it was coming off as not good at all, and the interview went awful. And so my biggest piece of advice to somebody is just be who you are, be authentic, because they have that application like everyone's saying, and you're more than qualified for this. So they're just trying to make sure who you are on paper is who you are in person.
So I guess my word of advice, at the end of the day, the Bettcher Foundation is all about giving back, and they look for that in their scholars. So I'm from a very small community, so it was easy for me to convey that I give back to my community. So I think that's something you can try to display in your answers.